Welcome once again to Wesley Impact. Later on, I'm going to be talking about a beggar in the New Testament who finds purpose. And we highlight our work with the homeless at the heart of Sydney. As we near Homeless Persons Week in Australia, we always like to focus on that. And today we meet a former Brisbane school teacher whose life was changed forever by a TV documentary, highlighting the plight of those who, for many different circumstances, often beyond their own control, couch surfing, living in cars or sleeping on the streets. Jean Madden was spurred into action and she committed herself to buy every homeless person in Brisbane a swag for Christmas, but soon realised existing products didn't meet the mark. As a result, a company, Street Swags, was born. To date, something like 14,000 swags have been distributed to rough sleepers free of charge. Jean joins me to tell us more. Jean, it's a delight to have you on the show and to talk to you.
Thank you.
Look, tell us what was the documentary that's referred to there? Is it something that you watched just by chance on telly?
It was totally by chance. And I've never seen the show since, actually. I only ever saw it once.
Yeah.
And it was an ABC production, and they had sent 2 reporters in Perth to sleep rough for the weekend. And their conclusions at the end of the show was that it wasn't so much being able to get food that was an issue. They found the biggest issue was not being able to have a good night's sleep. And I think I was actually in a swag because my husband and I had just built our home and we didn't really have any furniture yet. And it just seemed like such a no-brainer, such a simple idea to get these people, our swaggies of today, a swag. But as you said, what we could buy in the camping stores just wasn't going to work because it's too big and heavy and cumbersome and looks like bedding. And for the majority of people that we look after, particularly women and children, that liability of having an obvious bedroll on their back just wasn't going to work. I also wanted them to be able to carry their belongings around in it. So it had to be incredibly discreet, incredibly practical and incredibly simple. So I made the first one about Barbie doll size, if she was, you know, maybe not so glamorous. Yeah, and then my mum sewed the first few and we got people's feedback on the street and we changed it a little bit. And yeah, since then we've actually done 24,000 now. Across Australia.
For you, was this a faith response? Did it fit in with somehow with the way you thought about God and the world?
I had just finished a Master's in Theology. I was the head of religion and ethics at Nudgee College, which is really the home of street swags these days, Nudgee College in Brisbane. And I was teaching at Stewart Home, still in religion and ethics and studies of religion. And for sure it was, you know, you can sit around and talk about it all day, but at some stage, if you don't get up and do anything, you're really just a big old hypocrite, aren't you? So, you know, there was definitely that social justice that spurs to action. Definitely.
And look, we're going to hear a bit more in a moment or two about how what began as a seed grew into something far, far more. But before I do that, I'm going to introduce our performer on stage. Shanti Batsky has been with us many times. She's written this song. I hope you enjoy it, Pushing Through.
To another level. Too long I stood aside, watched the days go by. I put aside my fear to swim deeper waters. I'm treading on new ground. It's up to me to let go. So you I'm gonna push on through. Now I feel there's something inside of me. I keep on keeping strong. Let this dream unfold. Everything I wanted to be is right here at my reach. I walk this walk, I talk this talk. It's all about to get where I'm going. I'm pushing through. You know it feels so good to let go and trust that God's in control. I'm pushing through. You know it feels so good to let go and trust that He's in control.
To commemorate 200 years of faith and pioneering care in Australia, Wesley Mission has released a publication documenting its work in the community.
Everyone needs a little rest. Everyone needs a little joy.
For more information on today's people, today's story, you can contact us on 02 9263 5555 or email us at impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
So if you want to know more about Shantae and her music, click on the Wesley Impact TV link site. All this week you'll be able to find the details. They're online. We're back with Street Swag's founder, Jean Madden. Jean, as you've developed this particular work, lots of other things have come on board. People have come on board from prisons, from schools, realising it's probably a win-win in lots of ways. It's not just about the people who... Lots of people feel some fulfilment in it.
It's a whole community response to a community issue, and the community needs to own it if we're ever going to have an impact on what is extreme poverty and disadvantage for our own people. So the prisoners, it's the whole service delivery. So the prisoners gain qualifications for the textile industry, the school children who roll them and package them and, you know, write little letters and hygiene packs and blankets and things. And from there they go to all the different emergency accommodation shelters across Australia, hospitals, schools, church groups, everyone who works on the coalface for those people. So, and then, you know, all the different local businesses and things who sponsor them for the organisations in their towns. So it's about instilling people the responsibility to look after your own.
Now, you got involved in Victorian bushfires, 2009. It sounds that long ago now, but they were so major at the time. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, that one, obviously we had only, we were still early days. We've been going 8 years now, but that was the first major Australian disaster that we responded to, and we were pretty lucky that we had just picked up a load from the prison, so we had a couple hundred there, or at least the shells of them. So we got a call at about 2:30 in the afternoon. So the fires hit on the Saturday. The Sunday, some of the Sallys down here that we work with turned up at a girlfriend's place who they knew had a stock of them, and collected about 100 on that Sunday. And by the Tuesday afternoon, as the fires spread, we got a call, how quickly could we get another 200 down there? So I called Nudgee College, where they mobilised their entire boarding school, and you know, and my mother and my mother-in-law and myself ran around to all the different Spotlight stores to get Arctic polar fleece to cut into blankets. So we had made, by 8 p.m. that evening, and it was sweltering heat, we had made 200 blankets and rolled 200 swags with pillows and palleted them ready to be picked up in the morning. So, you know, and I think that's what Street Swags, that's the strength of Street Swags, because what I do is just about coordinating everyone else out there. You know, I never went out to reinvent the wheel or do anything. It's about getting the people who need what they need most as quickly and as efficiently and as cheaply as possible. So it's just about going to put everyone else together and everything that people are already working towards. So it's a massive force that is the force behind Street Swags.
Look, give me a sentence. In a sentence, homelessness is a big issue in Australia, far bigger than most people are prepared to recognise. But I think an emerging understanding comes about. What would you say is the most important thing for people to grasp about homelessness? What's the thing that you would say, look, this is what I want you to understand about homelessness? What would you say?
Well, when we started back in 2005, the majority of people who we were looking after were probably the image that people still have in their heads. An elderly fellow on the street probably has a mental illness, probably a problem with alcohol, you know, and it was that trifecta that was alcohol abuse coupled with domestic abuse coupled with mental illness that put people on the streets. Now, and particularly since the GFC, it's been families who just can't afford to live anywhere. These families won't go and get registered because they don't want to have their children taken off them and put into foster care. There's that huge fear. And it's a reality for so many people that we work with. But also they can't get Centrelink because they don't have an address. And, you know, I'm sorry, but if that's our social welfare system, it's got to change. It's not good enough.
And it's very important that this is done together and that this isn't just one group making a noise, but that together the whole sector, the whole of any part of the community that's concerned speaks up together.
Well, that's it. I was just over in New York at the end of last year, and they worked out about 10 years ago that it was cheaper to house people because of all the savings that they make on the police force and in corrective services and the hospitals and all the social services. It was cheaper to house people. So, but what they had to do first is they had to change the culture. The people had to say, we're not accepting this situation where our children are growing up in these conditions. You know, I see families sleeping in rubbish skips, sleeping in drainage systems, in wetlands, next to major highways, and they're families. And, you know, we have so much wealth in Australia. It's about looking after our own and our own backyard, but, you know, opening our eyes and taking responsibility for our own community.
So just quickly, Jean, how can people get involved?
If people could go to streetswags.org and please make a donation, particularly end of financial year is coming up. We need people to start looking after our own people. It's so simple to give these people that basic bed and shelter. Please, streetswags.org.
Plans for the future? Just quickly.
I have big plans. I have very big plans, and I'm just at a stage now where I can get into that. So, and the next step for me, I've always said street swags are the first step in keeping people alive. The next step for me is starting to chip away at that hurt that causes the abuse and is perpetuated by the abuse. And that's what locks people in this state of homelessness, which is in and out of incarceration as well. And so that's where I'll be working towards.
We'll be back right after this.
It's been 200 years since the first Methodists met in Australia. To celebrate 2 centuries of faith and pioneering care, CEO and presenter Reverend Dr. Keith Garner takes us back to where it all began.
But we don't begin here at the heart of London. We begin in a town in the north of England.
In this fascinating narrative, Reverend Garner chronicles the history of the life and times of the founder of Methodism, John Wesley. This fresh and thought-provoking documentary takes us on a journey throughout the United Kingdom, beginning in John Wesley's hometown of Epworth.
John Wesley was born here on the 17th of June, 1703.
This 1-hour DVD travels onto his education years and beginnings of social justice in Oxford, to his final years in London. For more information on John Wesley, the man and his mission, call 02 9263 5555 or email us at impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
At Wesley Mission, it's our heart to honour God and serve people. And Greg's story is a fine example of how Wesley Mission's work with those at risk of homelessness at Edward Lodge is helping people regain hope in their lives. Let's take a look together.
Well, I was born in Wentworthville, New South Wales in 1959. And as I grew up, my dad ended up going out to war. But when he come home, my childhood was a bit abusive because Dad suffered the Agent Orange disease, and it just affected his mind, and he used to abuse us children a bit and take it out on Mum a bit also, and end up becoming an alcoholic. I think I come to the age I was still attending high school, and I was about 15. I picked up a paper and seen there was a job for a spray painter's assistant working in a panel shop. So I went and applied for it, and ended up working there for 7 years and virtually giving Mum probably 75% of my wages just to feed the family. I thought, well, it's time to get out on my own and all that and make a life for myself. And I'd met a young woman, stayed together 6 or 5 years ago. I'd come home from work one day and found her with another man. Basically, I found myself living on the streets and just full of anger. I just wandered the streets for a few days, living on the railway station, and then after a while I'd bumped into a couple of young men that went to a Presbyterian church up at Blaxland, and they invited me along to the church. And we went out one weekend, went bush rock climbing, and I come across a cave. And without anybody knowing back to it, I went back to that cave and made a home there to sleep in it. Because I felt sleeping on railway stations in the middle of winter was getting a bit cold and I just needed somewhere with a bit more shelter. I just had enough after 2.5 years living in a cave. I just said, woke up one day and I just said, God, there's got to be a better life to this. Show me it. And it was just like as if he was my father. As if it was like something was holding my hand and just leading me along the path and put me on a train and brought me here to Edward Eagle Lodge. And I spoke to the pastor here, Don Walker.
Greg was going through a difficult time with his family and his wife. There was difficult times between them, but he wanted to restore the relationships. And I worked with Greg, or talked with Greg and listened to Greg for often about the various pressures he had on his life, and particularly coming from the family. And he was estranged from some parts of his family too, and he wanted to restore that relationship, particularly with his children.
Still, I have a few problems today that I try to help, and Don helps me through.
It was good to see Greg with the load being lifted off him.
I have a stable roof over my head. I have friends that care for me. But most of all, I find that I'm at peace in heart.
Let me introduce you to Luke's Gospel, chapter 18, and read from verses 35 through to 43. A blind beggar receives his sight. As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked, what was happening? They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. He called out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. When he came near, Jesus asked him, what do you want me to do for you? Lord, I want to see, he replied. Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has healed you. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw it, they also praised God. Now, it's important to recognize that a blind beggar did not have special help that came from some government fund. There was not offers those ways in which you might naturally gain resources to deal with your situation. They would be forced to beg. And a blind beggar was often perceived as somebody who might be blind for all kinds of reasons. It might have been something that he'd done. That was the way people thought about it. So being blind and being a beggar was very much something that came together in the kind of world that Jesus lived in. And it was a blind beggar who turned to Jesus for help. And it's very important to put it into context, because it tells us that Jesus is approaching Jericho, and as he is, he's coming along. He hears the commotion and asks for the question of people, what's going on here? And they tell him Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. And so he asks the obvious question. Jesus asks the obvious question of him when he cries out to him, what do you want me to do for you? Well, clearly what he wants to be done for him is his sight restored. But the asking of the question is very, very important, because there are many things he might be asking for. He might be just asking for some more money to be able to get through to the end of the day, the end of the week, to deal with the immediate problem. But Jesus knows that if he is prepared to seek in a deeper level for the real issue that is presenting itself at that moment in time, and is the real issue beyond that which presents itself, then there might be some way that brings healing and peace into his life. He asks the obvious. And then Jesus gifts him his sight. I think that's very important. It tells us quite clearly in verse 42, receive your sight, your faith has healed you. So his sight is restored, because it's a gift of God through Christ for him. And that really is a restorative power that comes into his life. But then there's a result. He follows and witnesses to what has happened. Now we read that in verse 43. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus. Then there's more, praising God. All the people saw it and praised God. Well, he received his sight immediately, yes, but he followed. He realized that this was a gift from Christ. And he knew also that it had consequences. If this was going to be a gift that he exercised, and it would change his life dramatically. Can you just imagine for a moment, you can't see, and then you're in a new situation where you can see. You're in a culture that rejects you because of your lack of sight. Now you have sight, you can engage, you can relate to people, you can make contact with people. How his world changes. And so following is so important for him. And then there's the response of the other people, the response of the crowd that's very, very real. They realized what had happened. They recognized it. And so there was a sense in which they too praised God. They expressed their sense of grace to God. Now, there's a number of things from this passage which speak to us when we think of those in need in this particular time, as we think of those who are homeless. First of all, Jesus is always prepared to listen to the cry that's made to him. Jesus is prepared to stop. We're told he stopped in his tracks, if you like, on this journey to reach out in need. And he's prepared to meet the obvious need that presents itself. Now, we have to be part of that healing work as we reach out to other people. But what is certain is there is a consequence, there is a reaction that needs to go on in our life as we know what it is to follow and witness to what has happened. So here's an account of a blind beggar, and it has so much to say to us. And I hope this morning and today we feel a real sense of God's grace working in our lives and reaching out to the most marginalised in our community.
If you would like to know more about today's topic, or for more on Keith's message, contact Keith by writing to Wesley Mission, Post Office Box A5555, Sydney South 1235. Or email impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
Many thanks for joining us. I'm going to leave you with Deborah Ezzy singing By Our Love. And so until next week, goodbye and God bless you.
Let us come together, walking in the Spirit. There's much to be done. We will come reaching out from our comforts, and they will know us by our love. Sister,